She walked into the lobby of Harrington Medical Centre on a Tuesday morning, wearing a second-hand coat and carrying a reusable grocery bag. And before she even reached the reception desk, a man in a security uniform put his hand out and told her to stop. "Excuse me, where do you think you're going?" Vivienne Caldwell stopped walking. She looked at the hand first, then at the man attached to it. His name tag said Trevor. He was maybe 30, broad-shouldered, and he was looking at her the way people look at something they've already decided doesn't belong. "I have a 9 o'clock, she said. "A 9 o'clock what? Meeting." She shifted the grocery bag to her other hand. "With the board." Trevor made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He glanced sideways at the woman behind the reception desk, a younger woman named Donna, who had been watching since Vivienne walked through the automatic doors and hadn't moved to help. Donna looked away. "That detail matters, remember it." "The board," Trevor repeated, like the word tasted strange. "Right. Can I see some ID?" Vivienne reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her wallet. She handed him her driver's license. He looked at it for a long time, longer than necessary. The kind of long that isn't about reading words on a card. "Vivienne Caldwell," he said. "That's right. And you're here to meet with the board?" "Yes." He handed the card back without looking at her. "I'm going to need you to wait over there." He pointed toward a row of chairs near the window. Plastic chairs. The kind they kept for patients waiting for discharge paperwork. "I'm not a patient," she said. "I didn't say you were. I said wait over there." She stood very still for a moment. The lobby was not empty. There were 2 men in suits near the elevator who had watched the entire exchange and said nothing. A nurse walked past, saw what was happening, kept walking. A maintenance worker in the corner paused, looked up, then looked back at his mop. Vivienne Caldwell walked to the plastic chairs and sat down. She was 61 years old. She had spent 34 years in healthcare administration. She had built a consulting firm from a single rented office above a dry cleaner in Halifax, and she had grown it to a company with offices in 4 provinces. She had turned around 3 failing hospital networks in the last decade alone. She had been brought to Harrington specifically because the board was desperate. Because the last 2 administrators had run the place into the ground, and the provincial funding review was 6 weeks away, and someone in a boardroom somewhere had finally made a phone call. She sat in the plastic chair and took out her phone. She did not call anyone. She did not text. She opened her notes app and wrote 1 line, the way she always did when something needed to be remembered. "Tuesday, Trevor." Donna looked away. 2 suits at the elevator. Said nothing. She had been keeping notes like that for 40 years. If you've ever walked into a room and felt the temperature change the moment you arrived, not because of the weather, not because of anything you said, then you already know what Vivienne Caldwell knew sitting in that chair. You don't have to be told. You just know. And you make a choice in that moment about what kind of person you're going to be. She had made that choice a long time ago. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. At 23 minutes, a man in a dark gray suit came through a door, marked Grimmingestrand, and walked toward her, with the expression of someone who had just been told something alarming. His name was Gerald Fitch. He was the board chair. He was 67 years old, and had been in hospital administration for most of his adult life, and had the posture of a man who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around him. "Miss Caldwell," he said, and his voice was careful, in the way voices get when people are embarrassed and don't want to say so. "I'm so sorry. We had you on the calendar for 9 and I wasn't aware there was any issue at the door." "There wasn't," she said pleasantly, and stood up. Gerald Fitch looked past her toward Trevor, who was standing at his post with his hands clasped behind his back and his expression completely flat. Fitch opened his mouth, then closed it again. "The boardroom is upstairs," he said. "If you'll follow me." She followed him. She did not look back at Trevor. She didn't need to. Now, before we get into what happened in that boardroom, and what happened the following morning, which is the part that nobody at Harrington Medical Centre has stopped talking about since, let's back up. Because Vivienne Caldwell's story doesn't start in that lobby. It starts somewhere much smaller and much harder, and if you don't know that part, you don't really know anything. She was born in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, the 3rd of 5 children. Her father worked at the Trenton steel plant until it closed. Her mother cleaned houses on the other side of town and came home in the evenings, smelling like other people's cleaning products. They were not poor in the way that makes for dramatic stories. They were poor in the quiet, grinding way. The way where you don't talk about it because talking about it doesn't change it, and you just keep moving. Vivienne was the one who kept moving fastest. She got a scholarship to Dalhousie. She studied health administration because it seemed practical, and she had learned early that practical mattered more than passion when you didn't have a safety net. She graduated near the top of her class. She got a job at a hospital in Dartmouth. She got another job, a better one, in Moncton. She learned. She watched. She took notes, always the notes, and she started to understand something that took most people twice as long to figure out. That institutions fail not because of a lack of money, but because of a lack of accountability. People who should say something don't. People who should act wait. And the gap between what an organization says it is and what it actually does is where everything rots. She started her consulting firm in 2001. Her first client was a small regional hospital in Prince Edward Island that was 4 months from closure. She spent 8 months there. She restructured the administration, renegotiated 3 supplier contracts, and implemented a staffing review that saved the hospital $2.3 million in its first year. The hospital is still open. She has never once taken credit for it in public. That is the woman who sat in the plastic chair. The board meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. There were 9 people in the room, and Vivienne Caldwell spoke for maybe 40 minutes of that time. The rest of the time she listened. She asked questions. She looked at the documents they'd sent her in advance, and she asked about the things that weren't in the documents, which is always where the real information lives. By the time it was over, Gerald Fitch had the look of a man who has just realized the person across the table from him is significantly more dangerous than he anticipated, in the best possible way. "We'd like to move forward," he said, as they were gathering their papers. "I know," she said. She took the elevator back down to the lobby. The grocery bag was still under her chair. She'd left it there while she was upstairs, an old habit, traveling light in rooms where people were watching. She picked it up. She walked toward the exit. Trevor was still at his post. She stopped. Not because she had something to say, just because she wanted him to have to look at her. And he did, eventually. Glanced up from whatever he was doing, registered her face, registered something else too, some flicker of something he couldn't quite name. She nodded at him, politely, the way you nod at someone in a hallway. Then she walked out. Outside, on Pemberton Avenue, she stood for a moment in the November air and let herself feel it. Just for a second. Not the anger. She'd made her peace with the anger a long time ago. Something else. Something quieter. The particular satisfaction of knowing something that hasn't happened yet. She walked to her car, a 10-year-old Subaru with a cracked side mirror and 2 hockey sticks in the back that belonged to her grandson. She drove to her hotel. She ordered room service. Soup and a grilled cheese. The same thing she always ordered when she was traveling. And she sat at the desk and opened her laptop and started writing. Not the proposal. She'd written most of that already. She wrote the notes. Everything she'd observed in that boardroom. Every hesitation. Every deflection. Every moment when someone looked at the table instead of at her. She wrote the maintenance worker in the lobby who looked up and looked back down. She wrote Donna who looked away. She had built her entire career on the things that other people decided not to see. The formal offer came 3 days later. It was exactly what she'd asked for. Actually, slightly more. Because Gerald Fitch had clearly gone back to the board and made the case. And to his credit, he had made it well. She would come in as interim chief restructuring officer. 12-month contract. Full authority over administrative operations, staffing, and vendor relationships. The title was technically temporary, but everyone in the room understood that if the provincial review went well, the conversation would continue. She signed the paperwork on a Friday afternoon, sitting in a coffee shop in Halifax with her lawyer, Dr. Raymond O'Cake, who had been doing her contracts for 15 years and who said, as he always did when she signed something significant, "You sure about this one?" Same answer as always, she said. That's what I thought. She was back in Toronto by Sunday evening. She packed 2 suitcases. She had learned to pack efficiently, a skill that felt minor until you'd done this as many times as she had, and she called her daughter Nadine and told her she'd be in New Brunswick for at least the next few months, possibly longer. Mom, Nadine said, they didn't give you any trouble this time? Vivienne was quiet for just a moment. A little, she said. The usual kind. Nadine knew what that meant. She'd grown up watching her mother come home from contracts with a specific kind of tiredness that wasn't about work. She'd learned early not to push on it. Okay, she said. You'll call me when you get there. I always do. She drove up to Harrington on a Monday. Not Sunday night. She'd learned not to arrive the night before. Not to be seen checking in at the hotel alone on a Sunday in a small city where everyone knows everyone. Monday morning, businesslike, no ceremony. She walked into the lobby at 8:45. Trevor was not at his post. A different guard was there. A woman named Patrice, according to her name tag, who looked up as Vivienne came through the doors and gave her the small professional nod that security staff give to people who look like they know where they're going. That distinction, small as it seemed, registered. She walked to the reception desk. Donna was there again. Same chair, same desk, same carefully neutral expression. But something had shifted. Some small recalibration in the way Donna held herself that said she'd heard something between Thursday and now. Good morning, Vivienne said. I'm here to see Mr. Fitch. He's expecting me. Of course, Donna said. He asked me to send you straight up, 14th floor. A pause. And Ms. Caldwell, welcome to Harrington. There it was. She took the elevator to the 14th floor. Gerald Fitch was waiting in the hallway when the doors opened. Which was the kind of thing that only happens when someone wants to make it very clear that the last impression was a mistake. He had 2 other board members with him, a woman introduced as Dr. Anita Parekh, and a man named Stuart Brennan from finance. Both of them shook her hand with the particular firmness of people who have been briefed. We've prepared your office, Gerald said. And I want to say again, on behalf of the board, that what happened last week was completely unacceptable, and we've already been in conversation with the security contractor about their protocols. Thank you, she said. Not. It's fine. Not. Don't worry about it. Just thank you. Clean and simple. She had learned decades ago not to absolve people of the things they actually did. Let them carry it. It's good for them. The office was large and faced the parking lot, which she actually preferred to the river view. She liked to see the logistics of a place, the patterns of who came and went, the infrastructure. She set her bag down on the desk and looked out the window for a moment. Then she opened her notebook and started the first page. Monday, Patrice at security. Donna corrected herself. Gerald in the hallway. Brennan's handshake too firm, compensating. Parekh made eye contact, held it. She'll be useful. The first staff meeting was Wednesday. She had asked for it to include everyone from department heads down to floor supervisors. Not the standard executive briefing, everyone. 43 people in a room that normally held 20. They brought in extra chairs from the cafeteria. She stood at the front without notes. I'm not going to tell you everything is fine, she said. You know it isn't. You've known for a long time, and nobody has been honest with you about it, and I think that's the first thing that has to change. The room was very quiet. I've read your internal reviews. I've read the audit. I've looked at your staffing numbers, and your supply chain, and your overtime records. And I want to tell you something. The problems at this hospital are not the fault of the people in this room. They are the result of decisions made by people who are no longer here, compounded by a culture of looking the other way. She paused. I know something about what that costs. A woman near the back, a charge nurse named Barbara, someone Vivienne had been briefed on as one of the longer tenured staff, shifted in her seat. She looked like she was trying not to cry, which was the response Vivienne had learned to recognize as the sign that someone had been waiting a very long time for someone to say exactly this. We have 6 weeks before the provincial review. Vivienne continued. That is not a lot of time. But I've done this before, and I will tell you what I always tell people. Institutions don't change because of money, and they don't change because of a government report. They change because the people inside them decide to do something different. That's it. That's the whole formula. She looked around the room. So I'm going to ask you to make a decision. And I'm not going to pretend it's easy. The 6 weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way that makes for good television. There was no single moment where everything turned around. There was just work. Relentless, detailed, unglamorous work. Vivienne arrived before 7 every morning, and she left after 8 most evenings, and she talked to everyone. Porters, pharmacists, billing staff. People who had never once been asked their opinion about how the hospital operated. She found what she always found. The people closest to the problems always knew exactly what the problems were. They just hadn't been asked. She restructured 3 vendor contracts and saved the hospital $1.7 million annually. She identified a staffing pattern in the overnight shifts that was quietly burning out the nursing staff and costing the hospital in sick leave and turnover. She found an administrative redundancy that had existed for 11 years because nobody had ever looked at it. She implemented a reporting structure that actually made sense. And she was in the building, every day, visible, asking questions and taking notes, and occasionally standing in a hallway just listening to how a place sounded. Trevor came back, not to the lobby. He'd been reassigned after the complaint Gerald Fitch filed with the security contractor, which Vivienne had not asked for but also had not objected to. He was working a different building now, across town. But one morning, 3 weeks into her contract, she was coming in through the side entrance. She'd started varying her routes, a habit, and she nearly walked into him. He was in street clothes. He'd come to drop off paperwork for Patrice, something administrative. He saw Vivienne and stopped completely. She stopped too. The hallway was empty. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the floor, then back up. Mrs. Caldwell. His voice was different than it had been that first morning. Smaller. Not apologetic, exactly. More like a man standing next to something he'd done and not quite knowing how to stand there. Trevor, she said. I didn't. He stopped. Started again. I didn't know who you were. She looked at him for a long moment, not unkindly, but clearly. I know, she said. That was the problem. She kept walking. She didn't write about it in her notes that night. Some things you don't need to write down. The provincial review came on a Thursday in February. 3 reviewers, 2 days, every department. Vivienne was present for all of it. She answered every question directly. She showed them the numbers, the new protocols, the early results from the staffing restructure. On the second afternoon, during a break, one of the reviewers, a man named Dr. Philip Asante, who had been in healthcare administration long enough to have seen everything twice, pulled her aside in the hallway. I've been doing these reviews for 17 years, he said quietly. I've never seen a turnaround this complete in 6 weeks. She thanked him. How'd you do it? He asked. She thought about it for a moment. I listened to the right people, she said, and I didn't let anyone convince me that the way things had always been done was the only way they could be done. He nodded slowly. You know they're going to ask you to stay on. I know. What are you going to say? She looked down the hallway that had been slightly understaffed on overnight shifts until 3 weeks ago, that had a supply cart that used to jam against the wall because nobody had thought to move the shelf, that had a charging station for the portable monitors that she'd suggested after talking to 2 nurses who'd been quietly managing without one for 2 years. I haven't decided yet, she said. That was true. She genuinely hadn't. There was another call coming. There was always another call. Another place. Another room full of people who had been told for too long that the way things were was just the way things had to be. But there was also something here. Something that had started, maybe, when Barbara, the charge nurse, stayed after that first staff meeting and said quietly that she hadn't thought anyone was ever going to say what Vivienne said. Something that had continued in the small ways that institutions start to shift. Slowly, unevenly, in fits and starts, but genuinely. She would think about it. The review results came back 2 weeks later. Harrington Medical Centre received the highest rating in the provincial network. The report cited significant administrative restructuring, improved staff retention indicators, and a demonstrable shift in institutional culture. Gerald Fitch sent her a bottle of wine, which she did not drink because she didn't drink, and a handwritten note, which she kept. The board voted unanimously to offer her a permanent position. She asked for 3 days to think. On the third day, she drove out to the Petit Kodiak River, which she had started doing on Sunday mornings when she needed quiet. She sat in the car for a while, watching the tidal bore, that strange phenomenon where the tide comes in against the direction of the river and the water seems, briefly, to reverse. It had fascinated her since the first time she'd seen it. The idea that something could flow one way for so long, and then, at the right moment, with the right pressure, simply turn around. She called Gerald that afternoon. "I'll stay," she said. He made a sound that might have been relief, or gratitude, or both. "One condition," she added. "Of course. Anything, the staff meeting format, the one where everyone's in the room, from department heads to floor supervisors. That becomes standard. Every quarter. No exceptions." A pause. Then, "Done." She hung up. She sat for another few minutes by the river, watching the water do what it always did. The thing that looked impossible until you understood the mechanics of it, and then looked inevitable. She'd learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing in any room was rarely the person speaking the loudest, or standing the straightest, or wearing the right coat. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the room is the person who sat in the plastic chair, took out their phone, and wrote down everything they saw. Because they were going to need it later. And they were going to use it right.